Our next speaker is Harish Kapadia. So Harish Kapadia, Devdutt talked to us about the gods. He talked about Shiva. He talked about Shakti. Where do they reside? They reside, in the Himalayas. And we have Harish Kapadia, who visits these gods regularly. So he is the one who is a regular visitor to the Himalayas. He's 75 years old, and he has been climbing the Himalayas for over 50 years. Harish Kapadia is not only a distinguished Himalayan mountaineer, he is an author and editor of the Himalayan Journal. He has been awarded Patron's Medal of the Royal Geographical Society in UK, the Lifetime Achievement Award for Adventures by the President of India, Indian Mountaineering Foundation Gold Medal, and the King Albert Mountain Award presented by King Albert I Memorial Foundation. He has written numerous books and articles in the Indian Himalayan on Indian Himalayas. Harish Kapadia was awarded the Piolet d'Or Asia Lifetime Achievement Award. I believe he is the first Indian to get this prestigious award, which in English you can translate as the Golden Pickaxe Award, in 2017 for his mountaineering and exploratory endeavors, and he became the first and the only Indian to receive this award. Now, Harish Kapadia did not have it easy. In 1974, he fell into a crevice at the height of over 20,000 feet. His rescue took over 13 days. So it was his companion who actually carried him for 13 days to a point wherein the helicopter could come and take him to the hospital. This was not a life-changing moment for him because he continued to do what he was doing earlier. It was just a hip-changing moment. He has written around 20 books or over 20 books, if I am right, including the Bible of the Trekkers in Maharashtra, Trek the Sahyadris, which he wrote in 1977. So I have a story to narrate. When I was in the hostel, there used to be a mountaineers club, and these young people, you would go for trekking, and they all used to use Harish Kapadia's Trek the Sahyadri book when they went out to the Sahyadris. And it is so mentioned that when they were asked, like, which is the most important book one would take back with them if there was a fire or something, most of the people would have said that we would want to take Kreyszig, which was, the advanced engineering math textbook. But the second most popular textbook, or rather, was Harish Kapadia's Trek the Sahyadris. So that says something about it. And which is now, I believe, in the 6th edition. His other books, Trekking in the Himalayas, Legendary Maps of the Himalayan Club, he has written on Siachen Glacier, the Battle of Roses. Today, he will speak about some of the inhabitants he met in the mountains when he went to visit the gods. So now I present to you Harish Bhai.
Yeah. Thank you, Birju Bhai. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
hello.
Sir. Yes, sir. You can be heard.
All right. After this, two great international speakers in front of me and one following me, I have to be very careful over what I say. So first of all, I go to Himalaya, of course, very much, but we don't go for purpose of meditation or anything else, but for climbing. It's more of a physical work. And I always say initially it started as a physical visits, then it became very intellectual to find out what route is where, and it's turning spiritual, and then I can sit at home and enjoy the hills. Now, first, what we have, every time Patanjali's prayers, I just pick up the first two words, Yogena Chittasya. So that is what I'm going to concentrate on, the people who have a mindset of yoga. Because after every lecture, people ask me, do you, two questions asked. First question I won't mention now. But the second question is, do you meet any sadhu sants or yogis in Himalaya? Unfortunately, that days are gone. That in a little cave, you find a sadhu sitting, or in a sim. All have made ashrams, and they are into a big 5-star hotel somewhere. And everybody, all who matter something has come down to Rishikesh. At least in the mountains, real mountains, we haven't seen any real sadhus. And the main thing is the real saints, they don't need you. So they won't come in front and talk to you. And those guys who come to you are not worth it. But then what has happened is that because of the proximity to Himalaya, living in Himalaya, villagers and lots of people have that yogic band in mind, which they do not realize. And we realize because of our Mumbai mind, we go and sometimes act contrary to it. So with the pictures of my trip, I'll introduce you to some of the, let's say yogic people, normal people of Himalaya. Here it is. What is the share screen? How do I get the share screen, please? Yes, okay. Okay. Is my screen seen, sir?
It is seen. You can go into the slideshow. Yes, it's seen well.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So I started going to Himalaya many years ago, and I mean constantly going. And we met a lot of people. And when I was in school, we met this guy, Harsing. Now he lives in a very small village in Himalaya. And somewhere when the first trip itself we gelled, so he and his children and his village people have come with me for last 30-40 years. And I owe a lot to these villagers. Without this, I would not have done even half what I have done. But he is a kind of a person who is not interested in anything which he does not need. Sir Bonington brought one red jacket, Burgos, and gave it to him, which was costing not more than 15,000 rupees at least. And he looked at it and then ultimately said, "Sir, ye nahi chalega." Okay, why? This is a red color, and animal of my village will come and attack me if it is red color. And he gave it back to him. But the idea that take a 15,000 rupees jacket and sell it for 10 never occurred to him. He said, "Humko nahi chahiye, humko nahi chahiye." Similarly, when you're celebrating, it's anytime he will just go and eat his dal chawal and not us. This is the small village where they live. Just hardly about 10, 12 houses. And when we went also to visit many times, I've been 2, 3 times, it was different. And this is the view he gets from his village, from his outdoor. Every morning he'll gets up and see these mountains in a different views, sometimes raining, sometimes cloudy, sometimes everything. And I personally feel that it is this view and this living there, it's constantly changing. And even though monetarily is far less than us or anybody in Mumbai, they have got very rich, and they just doesn't matter. Every time I ask him from Mumbai, what should I bring? And he would say, Kya laoge? Everything we have here. Why do you want to bring anything? And he has never asked me to come to Mumbai or never asked me to bring anything. He lived with his aged parents, both about 1995, and he looked after them. And next year I asked them that, Kaise, how are your parents? They very happily said, Dono gaye, both have gone. And both went very peacefully, sir. There was no problem. Absolutely, they went off peacefully. And, he was happy that he has served them, and now they've gone to their abodes. And this is one of the village down below. And I was going to buy shoes. So I kept on going into different shops to buy a shoe. And our children are also trained in Mumbai not to talk to a stranger or suspect strangers because of the obvious reasons in Mumbai. So one of them came and told me, Harish bhai, there is one chap following you and he is standing outside your shop whenever you go in. So I turned back and looked at the chap and said, why are you coming with after me? He goes, no, sir, I am from Harsing's village and you are going in to buy shoes. And so if you buy something, I'm standing here to carry it for you because we don't like our elders to carry shoes. And you felt miserable. With our Mumbai mind, we are suspecting. And while the guy had an absolutely altruist motive to come and take you and hold you. So these are the sort of experiences which really make you change, not them. And finally, we got him Harsing to Mumbai. During my son's wedding, we had to literally force him. You must come to Mumbai. So they both came wearing a suit and all that. And in the wedding, we have all the gifts and money coming. So he was sent to again collect. Harsing, collect karo some. So 2, 3 of my relatives and they came and told me, "Are you having these guys, villagers collecting? Are they safe? About money and jewelry and everything. You don't worry. You can trust your life also as we have done." But then we were also all the time, little bit of carefully. All our relatives were looking at him, but he was not bothered by that. Now this is actually job. On our trip he comes, he cooks, and we sleep in the tent nearby and it does its job very efficiently. If it's morning 6 baje chai, I mean absolutely 6 o'clock there'll be tea in your tent and whatever menu you say you'll come. But then from this he was transferred to a great mountaineer. Now in the 1992 we climbed a peak called Panchachuli with this Britisher Stephen Venables, Sir Bonington and others. And as we went up and the way back, Venables fell. And you see the blood and everything coming down. One leg was broken, one ankle was broken with the other legs. He was completely incapacitated. So the Britishers, they made a kind of a tent and put him in this. And one guy came down to warn us, "Okay, accident has happened and we need and call for helicopter." Now, this is the terrain that we have to sort of go through. And next 3 days, helicopter just could not locate him. And so those two guys were sort of stranded above. So finally, they said that they had lack of food, so we have to send some food up. And only person who could carry that food and all this was Harsing. So he volunteered. "मैं जाऊंगा." So his shoe size is 7. We gave him a 10 number shoe size, only available, and ice axe and all that. We had never done anything. And the terrain I showed, with this he went up and deposited the food up there. And after 2-3 days, helicopter picked up Venables, but that was the saving of Venables. He would have died otherwise. So Britishers were very happy. And as we came down, they said, "Okay, he's one of the best mountaineers we have seen and all that. So we'll send him for our training courses." I said, "In Bombay, India, you can't send him because he's treated as a porter ultimately, and he'll be overtaken. Then we will give him a trip to London. I take him to there. We'll take him to Buckingham Palace to see some exhibitions and Alpine Club, and then maybe do a course to do something." Asking. So I asked Harshing, "They are asking you to come to London. Will you go?" So he just folded and said, "Sir, my animals, my sheep and goats are lying around unattended for a long time. Let me go there and you all go to London. I'm not coming anywhere." So he flatly refused because that another world did not attract him. He was satisfied. He was happy. And many times we have seen that, say in a queue to Badrinath temple, there were a queue, 1 kilometer queue, and one of the Bombay person and Harsing with both thalis, they stood there. And then after about 20 minutes, our Atul Bhai was in the queue. He was very wanted to go in, and Harsing ne dekh diya, "Kaun gapla karega?" Because already Badrinath was with him already. He was not bothered or not going to stand in a line for 1 hour to go in, and he quietly walked out. So that becomes all differences. And this guy still continues with us. He comes everywhere and absolutely demands nothing. We have told him we are kind of insurance. If you need anything, let us know. But up to now, he's not bothered to ask us anything that way. Then another yogi who called is Dr. Maida. He's here. He's a Japanese who was kind of a came into India because of Gandhi and was friends with Nehru, and ultimately was responsible for a green revolution in Punjab and well connected. But with all that, he decided to live in a forest near Lonavala, absolutely inside, which was that time nobody visited. And we just accidentally met him. So he went and constantly stayed with him at different times in his this place with a Koregar behind. And our day will begin with yoga. My first yoga also, earliest yoga was with him. And he will pray and very sincerely. And I've seen him many times giving medicine to villagers. So we'll put medicine in front of Buddha's thing and pray. And yeah, Maida sab kya ho raha hai? My prayers will work. This medicine is just carrier of it. Ultimately, they will get it. And he became very popular there. But then, he also sometimes, sit down and children again will ask him, "Maida uncle, aren't you afraid staying alone in the jungle?" So he just thought for a minute and said, "I am not alone. Nature is with me. So I don't have to be worried about it. Constantly I'm with part of it." And he thoroughly enjoyed himself, thoroughly evolved himself and gave us a lot. And we learned various crafts and medicines because we used to go 2-3 times a year near Lonavala, and lots of children learned from him. Now, near near Gangotri, there is a long ground called Tapovan. This is about above Gaumukh, and it's got a fantastic view. Here you see peak of Sudarshan Parvat, and there is the Shivling peak behind it. And this on empty ground stayed one sage called Tapovan Maharaj. That's why the ground is called Tapovan. And he was living from 1980 or something. 1880 to 1957. And he was considered an absolutely Vedantic scholar. He lived there, and we had intellectual people with him, like Chinmayanand, Shivanand, and Swami Anand and all. And they all lived there during winter and everything and practiced their craft. And he is considered a great authority on all these things, but very much on his own. And then they made a kind of a trip, educational trip and explorationic trip across Kalindi Khal, because it was written in the scriptures that sadhus used to go from Gangotri to Badrinath. Then he said, "You must try that." So they went in chappals, grass chappals, only potatoes, and one guide was standing on the right. And they crossed this high path, which is still considered a difficult thing. And they reached on the other side to just prove a point to themselves that the sages were correct in the original stuff. And very of the great persuasion ultimately, because the German expedition was there, they persuaded him to write a book, and that's why we know about it. And whole this area has got one godfather called Dandi Swami. He was also at that time all sadhus. I need not repeat, but they were all intellectual people, PhD scholars, scientists, and many of the scientists, by splitting atoms, to realize that there is more than science and their soul. So many of them retired, come here, and they were very genuine people throughout. So this Dandi Swami built various dharamsalas for the pilgrims to stay. That time people had to walk from Rishikesh, but it was a 45-day trip going to Badrinath. And at every point there will be dharamsalas of Dandi Swami, and there is a Kali Kamli wala who come and give them all blankets and all. And he really looked after all the pilgrims. So it's a very genuine service. In fact, we went on an Indo-French expedition. We were also eating in a straight line in Dandi Swami's ashram, and with a lot of other porters and drivers and all sitting down with us. And he was absolutely, we could feel it is great. And the area has also got a lot of tradition of faith. Here the Gangotri Duli is brought down from to this temple from up, and that the tradition goes that this Gangotri cannot sit on ground. They have to, so the villagers turn by turn will stand standing all 24 hours, so that the Gangama doesn't have to rest on ground. So that itself is also great faith. And from the temple, you look up, the Sadorshan Parvat is seen. That is this, and that we climb by this very difficult route. And luckily, everybody climbs safely and come back. So my Parsi friend said, look, everything has gone well, and we got about 100 kilos of extra food. So you wait here, and I'll send some porters, and let's gift it to some sadhu sons in Gangotri. So we waited, and we started, myself and Kanubai, with the food and coming back, and somewhere the news had spread. These guys have got food and they are coming. And as a result, I was surprised. 5-7 kilometers before, all the sadhu saints in yellow robes started coming. Sir, mujhe de do, sir, mujhe de do. And then finally, one chap came in. He said, sir, coffee hoga to mujhe chahiye. Coffee nikal lo. So again, then my Parsi friend got angry. Sir, itna hi coffee chahiye, to why did you retire? Go down, Rishikesh mein coffee ka bhandar hai. Every day make coffee and have a bath with it. But then after being sannyasi, you are still running after coffee and coming up 5 kilometers to me. So then finally we were very disappointed and trapped with this food, what to do. And then somebody thought of Dandi Swami, that he was feeding us and everybody. And we went to Dandi Swami, and he showed no interest in our food. All right, if you feel like that, leave it in this room, and next 2 days I'll give it off to all the drivers and everybody who comes to me. And variety of people and experience. But otherwise, now a lot of people, you would find it very of dubious character also. Now, mountaineering and yoga also has a lot of good things. When in 1947, the British left India, it was almost presumed that the sport of mountaineering would be over, because only the British were climbing. And soon this professor from Doon School, is still alive at 96 of age, Gurdial Singh, he organized the first Indian expedition to go to a high peak called Trishul. And when they reached the summit of Trishul, 1951, which is considered the beginning of mountaineering for India, he performed a Shirshasan. He said 23,000 feet. He made a little hole inside the snow and just went up on this. And not to be given up, his companion Greenwood, he also did a jump and made a kind of a Vrukshasana on the top. I hope my names are correct. So at 23,000, these both things were happening, and this was which by the symbolic yoga poses, the age of mountaineering in India began. And still we do a lot of yoga, not lot, but something here and there when you are going with the expeditions, and whenever there's a free day, you perform that day, and it is still very enjoyable. And in fact, many times I have suggested to our instructors, let's have a yoga in open, in nature, instead of a room. So maybe someday that might happen. But then mountaineers have not been so having a faith and everything. This Everest, and every time a lot of people call. I mean, 1995, there are more than about 200 people on this route, all wanting to go up. And they got a warning that bad weather is coming in next 3 to 4 days. And they were all advised to withdraw. But then, as we call it, they all had return tickets from Kathmandu to home. And they said, if you miss it, then we can't climb Everest. And if you go and climb Everest, then our tickets will be gone. So everybody tried to rush and beat the storm. And the storm came 2 days early, and they were trapped on the top, and 17 people died in one day. They were all strewn all over the whole mountain, and it has become one of the most major tragedy. and it has been called as the return ticket deaths. They were not ready to accept scientific warning, or they were not having to, faith will go and come back. So this sort of arrogance also is many times killed. And same thing happened on K2. There were about 15, 20 people were dying. Every 2, 3 days there was a news. A storm, somebody happened, and somebody fell down, and the news were filtering to England. Now the England press people could not realize what is happening. So they called one famous photographer, John Clare, to be in the studio and to decipher. And he would say, all right, who is he? Okay, he had climbed Nilkan. Oh, so he had conquered Nilkan. So sort of John Clare used to say, no, he's not conquered, he's climbed. We don't call it conquered. And who is this guy? He's climbed so and so. Oh, he had also conquered. So finally he said, we don't call it conquered. You have to call it climb, at least with some humility. No. British public has right to know what they've done. So we are going to conquer. They're all the conquerors. So then John Clare got fed up and said, all right, call it what you like, conqueror. But remember, who conquered who? Climbers are all dead and mountain is still standing. So it was the climbers who had sort of just perished with their arrogance. And back from K2 and Everest, there are many small mountains and small peaks like this, and small temples, which are a great pleasure. This Bansi Narayan temple, I've been there twice. There is a fabulous view of mountains, but then there is a rock behind and there are fissures in the rock. So when the wind blows, it makes a very beautiful sound, which of course we with our Mumbai mind go, oh, no, this is like this and this is scientific this. But the shepherds that took it, to Krishna ki Bansi ho rahi hai. It's a Bansi Narayan. And it was very sweet sound if you look at it that way. And that's why this was built maybe 500 years, 400 years, God knows. But this small temple was built, and a lot of shepherds are roaming around, and they come during the evening sometimes when there's a wind, they come to listen to this Bansika sound. And it has become a very legendary thing. And so with so much view, and it feels so peaceful at this point that we've been twice up to now. And there is Rudranath, a very difficult place to reach. And on this Rudranath, there is a kind of a ridge which you have to cross. So Kali Kamliwala had one dharamsala at the bottom, other dharamsala on the top, and third dharamsala on the other side. But then on the upper dharamsala, there was no food available. So whenever the pilgrims used to go, they would give a lot of packed lunches and Kali Kamlis and all that. You stay on the top, and next day you can get down and you will get another food. So one morning they sort of gave it to somebody, to one sadhu, and he said, "Bhai, kya hai ye?" Okay, this is a food for tomorrow. So he said, "Sadhu kal ki chinta nahi karta. As I have renounced the world, so I don't worry about tomorrow. Let's see." Okay, but sir, wait, no, he just walked off. And then came a storm for 2-3 days, and this Swami Anand and others thought, Gaya, the sadhu would be dead by the time we go up. So when the storm stopped, they just went up and up and up, and went up to the dharamsala, and they saw sadhu sitting aram se having a chilam and eating. So what happened? तू आया क्यों? आपको बोला ना कि मैंने साधु कल की चिंता नहीं करता. अने यहाँ आप लोग आए, उसके पहले ऑपोजिट साइड से एक बिग पार्टी आई, about 30 लोगों के, महाराज and everything, and they are stuck here with me. So they are feeding me everything, and you don't even have to worry. I mean, God had made arrangements for me to survive and be very comfortable here. And this sort of incidences, they make a lot of different things. So then I know once we went to Bhutan and Arunachal border to a place called Bangajang, and this is a lovely lake, but very cold that time, November, and small temple, and we were all the time wondering, kisne banaya, kya ho, all that. And on the trek, we had our yoga teacher, Arti Mehta. Now, I've been criticizing that we Mumbai people have a very closed mind and all that, but she sort of being a yoga teacher and having done so much yoga proved it otherwise. I mean, she knew nothing about mountaineering. She had never walked on snow, and she was not prepared for anything major until we gave it to her things. And she, later on a recording, she said, look, I said, I'm going to hills, so let's see whatever happens, I will carry on. And he had faith in mountains and herself, and mind was pure. So then she could walk comfortably without anything on coming all around. So that is also, I think, our Mumbai mind, if it is claimed with yoga, it would certainly be able to helpful. And on the top at 17,000 feet is a small temple of Bangajang, which is a lot of stories and history. But then who built it here? Why they built it here? And on the border of Bhutan, Arunachal, why so many people come here, and who propagated that? This is very so ancient. Old Kate is not in history anywhere. And these questions of an ancient faith, simple faith of a simple person, you really wonder many times. And inside this temple at 17,000 feet, there are Buddhist paintings. Now, again, who's came here from Bhutanese paintings or Arunachali paintings, and where? Or somebody's come from plains. So all these questions also of a human faith and human progress comes to your mind. And our friend Mihir always wanted to do a Shirshasana. And he gave a reason. I want to see Himalaya on the reverse way. He is standing there. But he performed Shirshasana, but unfortunately facing us, and Himalaya is to his back. So anyway, he had performed his, desire at least. Now, one of the people whom I really admire is Dalai Lama. Now, here in 1983, we were here and there was a Kala Chakra festival that he was doing and lecturing to people of Spiti, and thousands had walked miles and miles and gathered here to listen to him. So we looked at the crowd and he was going on, and we went ahead and camped. And our idea was to go into a very little valley just behind, and first persons to go in there. And then in the early morning, we saw two jeeps coming. I don't have pictures of that. And the front jeep, we saw Dalai Lama sitting. That time there were no much of security or scrutiny. So we did namaste, and he halted the jeep. Said, what are you guys are doing here? So that we are going to this area and toward the border. You will is go to Tibet. You will see my people. So yes, yes. From far away, whatever we can, we'll see Tibet. Okay, please, if you ever see anything, just tell me what is happening there. If you see anything, because I don't want my people to be left out. Whatever is happening, I would like to know. And if you ever meet any Tibetan on the way, just tell them that we are with them. And we just pranam, and he blessed us and go on. I thought I'll never have to meet him again. Then also it's fine, because this was one-to-one person meeting in 1983 was good enough. But I was lucky to have another round with him. That was in Himalayan Club 80th year. We met him. We gone on the delegation, and he just entered, did a namaste, and we all got up. He said, no, sit down, sit down. If I say I'm Dalai Lama, I'm alone. I have to sit on this chair alone. Nobody will talk to me. So I am like you. We are together. So whenever you ask me question also, don't get up. Just sit down, and we'll have a good long chat. And actually speaking, when he first came to India in 1959 from China and all that, so government of India was not very comfortable with him and lots of Tibetans coming in, because after all this is from Chinese and China and all that. But then there are incidences which happened, which completely proved that Dalai Lama was a genuine original saint, whatever you can call it. Particularly one day there were a lot of shops of Tibetans by McLeodganj, where he lives. And two ladies, they came from down below, and they went to a shop, a Tibetan shop, and said, I would like to see this. And he was attending to a foreigner. He said, no, I have something arrogant. I have no time for you Indians, and this is I have to buy here. So those ladies went down. They are politically connected from that side. And in the evening, lots of people from down below came with the sticks, because they were already irritated that Tibetans are taking our business. And they destroyed the bazaar, including beating up all the Tibetans. Somebody broke bones and somebody broke back and all that. And next morning, all these Tibetans sort of, with the scratches and this, and everyone went to Dalai Lama and expecting that Dalai Lama would help them. So Dalai Lama said, look, it is your karma. You are doing something wrong. Indians have given us shelter. We are here. And now you talk to them arrogantly. This is bound to happen. And what you got it is the warning. Otherwise, India will throw you out. And we have to respect to them. What they have done is wrong, but that their karma, they will suffer. But what you have suffered is of your karma of extremely behaving badly with Indian. And he gave a little slogan: India, love it or leave it. If you don't like India, you don't love India, go away anywhere you like. But if you stay here, you must love Indians, just as I am loving Indians. And this little slogan and this little incident changed lots of attitudes of Indian government towards him. He's truly a genuine person, and which we don't have to be worried about him. And so finally, he has detailed laughed against Chinese and Indians and everybody. And recently, also some foreigners, they came with a suggestion that whatever we go and climbed in Tibet or trek, money goes to the Chinese, and who would sort of subjugate more Tibetans. So they said we should not go to Tibet and boycott it. And he thought Dalai Lama would be happy. Dalai Lama immediately gave out a statement, please, please don't do that. I don't want my people to be left out from the world. Whatever is possible, you go, more and more go. Whatever money you can give to Chinese, all right, we'll face it. But you must come and tell me how my people are doing. And my people should also know that world cares for us and they comes to us. So please do not, boycott Tibet for sake of Chinese even. Now I come to a little different type of faith, which I don't know, it's very different because the Indian army is fighting at Siachen Glacier, which is about average 20,000 feet. And this is their temple. There are a wall with the names of all people who have died. More than 2,000 people have died in 25 years. So this is the temple from which they go. And though it may be army, might be in the killing spree or nothing, but then they are also have this faith, and they have to have faith to fight and stay at those high altitudes. And this is a little string of entries that are made, every regiment. And this is a kind of a big emotional movement for them, because 700, 800 people will move through these gates and they have a cup of tea and ring a bell. And it's the emotional movement because they know all of them will not come back alive to move through this gate. At least some of them will be killed on the mountain. Somebody will be so seriously injured that they have to be flown by helicopter. And a lot of people will be incapacitated. And staying the 6 months on snow is a very challenging thing. So through this they go, and you see the mountain, caves behind. So they go to that cave. This is the last act of faith they perform to God, worshipping, before moving on to the glacier. They say, please protect us. And it's a completely next is a glorious church, and next to it is an Idgah wall where even Muslims can pray. But because the whole war is of artillery war, there is no your skill doesn't work at all. There is no enemy to fire it. It is the artillery war. A shell comes and falls on you. So if you're staying in a camp and a big shell falls on you, at the same time 10, 15 people are dead. So that's what causes more faith. Yeah, please God save us, because it is beyond human comprehension, beyond human capacity to protect yourself, and their abilities or their training does not work here. And these are the sort of mountains that they have to climb, which makes it very difficult. So the soldiers over the years have developed their own god called OP Baba. That is fire accurate artillery. One officer has to go ahead, and he's called Observation Post, OP Baba. And there was a person called Om Prakash, Observation Post, and he went ahead and directed accurate fire. And so he's sort of soldiers have attempted as an presiding deity of the glacier. And everybody worships OP Baba. They salute here finally and go back to next camp and salute him first time. And it's a very important thing to see us. And inside the temple also you see a small temple will be always Jai OP Baba and everything. And particularly you see the flag on the left side. It's got the names of, Sharma, Muhammad, Rasul and Hussein and everybody, Hindu, Muslim and Buddhist names all together. Because they say that, a bullet does not ask me my religion before hitting me. So why should we bother about religion? This is all, OP Baba will protect us. And they also say that this is not the war between Hindus and Muslims. This is a war between two nations, India and Pakistan. And Muslims are fighting shoulder to shoulder with me. And they also have the same faith. They also do namaz and everything. And every morning they are also pray with us. So it's a very unique, different institution they have created for themselves. And now finally I'll come to a Tibetan concept called Pemako. Now Tibetans in the scriptures they write, if there is a long area, large area here around Brahmaputra, which they call it Pemako, which is a holy land. It's completely forested. And when there is a problem on the Tibetan culture and civilization, the Tibetans will come into Pemako, and here they can last for years together. And now they unfortunately is divided between India and China because Brahmaputra enters through the borders. So the Tibetan part of Pemako is now not with us. And during 62 war, a lot of people came down to come to this Pemako, but Indian government in their wisdom sent them down to Bangalore. They did not so many Tibetans standing next to the border. But this Pemako is such a holy land, and you feel nice going to it's a long valley, and there are small pilgrim places on the mountain tops. And it's a tough thing. I mean, there are say lots of ladders like this. In a day, you have to climb 2-3 times this or more, and you climb up this ladder, cross, and the other side there is another ladder which you go down. And it all becomes very strenuous. And that is also their pilgrimage. Now there we heard long sonorous voice and somebody singing, and they said a Tibetan Lama is come. And that Lamaji is doing prayers. And when only he does prayer, he stays in a house. Otherwise, he's all the time in the caves. And luckily, he agreed to see us. We went and sort of talked to him. And he did not speak anything but Tibetan. So his wife luckily knew English. So through them, we were chatting. And He asked me where I've been and where I've been to Tibet and all that. And we asked him where he is coming from, and what are his experiences and all. And he was a very fine person, a very great personality, 6 foot tall and with a big sonorous voice. And as I was about to leave after this, doing namaste and all that, he said something to his wife and asked me a question. Sir, you have now traveled so wide and you've gone to different places and you know so many things. But now, what preparations you are making to meet your God? You are aged. I was zapped. I don't know what to answer to him. आप ही बताइए what is happening. Okay, that's why God has called you to Pemako to find that answer. How will you go and face him? How will you go there? And that's why till you will find that answer, you will have to roam around in the hills. And once you are ready, then you may be able to go and meet your God. Well, that's a very peaceful answer. And through all the prayer flags and all that, we walked back quietly home. But still, the final enduring image with me would always remain this simple faith of a simple villager. He's walked miles and miles. He doesn't have much money. He's come and stayed everywhere. And now in Badrinath, queue or no queue, here he is praying. And this is his final salvation, final obligation. And without any intellectual anga bunga and all that, he is just here praying for his Badrinath. And that's why they say, never doubt simple faith of a simple villager. Thank you, sir.